seen at all like this in the last couple decades. Talk to me a little bit about the excitement of exploring something totally new for you that you clearly have a lot of reverence for.
Well, yeah, there's that side of it. I mean, in terms of, it is a genre that I really love, like psychological thrillers and horrors, and especially from that decade, from the 60s. But then on the other hand, I think I've been thinking about this film for like 10 years, and I'd always wanted to do something like this. But part of the challenge of it, and part of the reason it's been percolating for so long, is I thought it would be sort of disingenuous to do it about something that didn't scare me. Because I think if you're making anything that has any horror element, there's got to be a part of it that is disturbing to you. And obviously some of the themes of the films are extremely disturbing. And in that sense, when I first thought of the story, the first thing that I did like nearly 10 years ago was hire a researcher. It wasn't something that I was ready to jump into writing straight away, and indeed I didn't write it on my own eventually. So the first thing I did was hire a brilliant researcher, Lucy Pardy, who actually just won a BAFTA as a casting director for this film, Rocks. And she sort of basically I sort of gave her a list of all of the facets of the story that I wanted to research, and she just came back with this like phone book sized research document with like testimonials from people who had lived and worked at Soho at the time and live and work at Soho now, because you know a lot of people who were there are still there, you know, and some of them are not there, and that is obviously like darker stories in themselves. And so that was something that I had this like for a long time, where I had the story, but then I had all of the kind of the facts, and because the whole film in a way is about the sort of perception versus reality. So to kind of have like this enormous tome of Soho research that was, you know, kind of disturbing to read in one sitting. And then it was like later, so I'd always been meaning to get down to it, and I'd started developing it before The World's End, so it was 2 films back. And then Christy Wilson-Cairns, who co-wrote the script with me, I was introduced, she co-wrote in 1917, and Sam Mendes had introduced us. And he said, oh, do you know Christy Wilson-Cairns? I said, no. He goes, oh, you two would get on like a house on fire, spoiler. So I met her in Soho, and we went for a drink, and she happened to mention, we were sitting in a Soho house. I guess this is kind of, this tells you everything about Soho itself, is that Soho House is opposite a strip club in Soho. So we were sitting in Soho House, and she said, Sunset Strip, which is a strip club that has been there since the 60s and is still there and has survived the pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. And she said, I lived above Sunset Strip for 5 years when I was working as a barmaid at the Toucan, which is in the film, which is a real pub. And when she said that, I said, I have this story I want to tell you. So then later, I think maybe about a month later, we got together again and we went on like a Soho bar crawl. It was actually on the night of Brexit. And we were both, as people who wanted to remain in Europe, we were sort of drowning our sorrows. So we went on a Soho bar crawl, which ended up we went to the Toucan and we went to this like after hours, there's like a bar for theatre and bar staff that's after hours called Trisha's. And I told her the entire plot of the movie. And she was like, oh wow, and you know, I was basically sort of just using her as a sounding board, but I think in the back of my head, I was just seeing what her response would be. And then like a long time after that, after I'd finished promoting Baby Driver, I was in Los Angeles and I was thinking, right, I have to do Last Night in Soho next. And I think I looked at my blank final draft document for about 15 minutes before calling Christy and saying, hey, remember that Soho film? Do you want to write it with me? And she goes, yes, I would love that. But can you do it right now? And I said, yes, I'll come back to London. So I flew back to London and then we started writing. And we rented an office in Soho and I put all the index cards of the plot on the wall. And it looked a bit like I was trying to find the Zodiac Killer or something. It looked a bit like John Doe's apartment in Seven. And I was worried that she was going to come in and go, ooh, new. But we wrote the first draft of the script. And it was amazing to have sat with the story for so long and had all this research, and then somebody, her to come in and sort of, and then what was interesting about it was the things where our experiences were similar, and then obviously we had different experiences as well. And you know, as somebody who worked as a barmaid in Soho for 5 years, she had a whole bunch of other stories as well, and bits of dialogue that go straight from real life into the movie.